What's up, guys? Welcome to week 2 of this NTI deal that we're doing. This week, we're going to be focusing on how conflict impacts characterization in various stories. Those stories being Lamb to the Slaughter, which is a short story, and All Rights Reserved, which we'll be dealing with later on in the week. So, first things first, today, this video is an instructional video. I'm going to be reading Lamb to the Slaughter to you guys, and I'll be dealing with most of the narrative elements myself. I'm leaving characterization to you guys, because that is what you'll be doing Tuesday and Wednesday. So you guys have a document like this that gives you very specific outlines of everything you need to do, and it does give you copies of the story. That story is still going to be found on Classroom, and that's what you'll use to answer your questions or do your assignment. You got a theme statement closure there. You have grading criteria for everything you're expected to do throughout the week. Your Flipgrid assignment, this will link you right to that assignment and your grading criteria for Flipgrid 2. So please use this document as you go through your stuff for the week. Cool. You are going to be able to choose your own assignment. There are 3 choices. And Wednesday, I'm going to ask you a question, and that'll be found on Google Classroom that you can answer. Thursday, I'm going to expect your Flipgrid response and your Section 2 questions. And then Friday, you're going to be able to do the replies to your classmates, any of the classmates from either of the 2 classes. And there are 60 of you all total, so we'll see what you can get done. Based on your responses on the Google form, there are a lot of different times that you all can meet, but most of them fell in the 12:30 to 2 time. So to help get some of the stragglers who are going to be on a little later, Monday, I'm going to meet with you guys 3 to 4. Tuesday will be 12:30 to 1:30. Wednesday will be 1 to 2. Thursday, 3:30 to 4:30. And then Friday, 12:30 to 1:30, since most of your work is due by 3 o'clock that day. The reading schedule this Thursday, you should be around Influent, which is $19.99. And next Thursday, you should be on the chapter Bridget, which is $26.99. And if you still haven't joined up, the Flipgrid class code is Honor Quill, just like the Remind code, Honor Quill. All right, great. Your notes are the same ones from the video last week. I'm not going to go over all of them again. I just think it's very helpful that you know what they are. Your universal idea, theme, plot, conflict, the different types of characters, protagonists and antagonists in a story, dynamic and static, and characterization, which is really important this week. And we're also dealing with symbol. At the end of this video, I will be reading Lamb to the Slaughter, and I'll go over the plot and we'll talk about characters and everything in it. It's important as we read it. You can either read it yourself or you can listen to my reading. But we want to pay attention to how Miss Maloney, who's our protagonist of the story, starts at the beginning and how the conflict changes her by the end of that story. So we have a couple different types of conflict in the story too. That's person versus person and person versus self. So you're going to be comparing and contrasting those traits. Okay, so for Tuesday and Wednesday, you have 3 options for your assignment. You can either 1, record a Flipgrid explaining the traits of Miss Maloney at the beginning of the story and how the conflicts change her at the end of the story, husband. So I want you to also in that explain how your perception of her changed and what the theme we should take away from the story. How does that theme connect to our lives and your life specifically? That should be about a 3 to 5 minute video. Or you can do number 2. You can draw an outline like the one right here of just any regular body is fine. Divide it in half. And then I want you to draw symbols, list character traits, those should be adjectives, and design each side to represent Mrs. Maloney before and after the main climax of the story. So you don't just draw a leg of lamb. You can draw pieces of the house. You can draw parts of the investigation. And your drawings don't have to be limited to the inside of the body outline. They can be on the outside. And you can get really creative with it. But you do need to write a short explanation of your design choices. If you choose that assignment, you need to take a picture of it and upload that to Google Classroom or send it to me on Remind. Your third option is the basic answer the questions, complete sentences, Those questions discuss the plot, characterization, and symbolism of the story. Cool. Now, let's move to Thursday and Friday. You should have the Section 2 summaries assignment on Classroom. Those summaries have a topic listed next to them. I want you to include information about that topic in your summaries as you discuss the regular things happening in the chapter. Conflicts, characters, setting, that kind of thing. Your next Flipgrid assignment, again, asks you to create 3 Level 2 questions and 1 Level 3 question. Let's remember a Level 3 question can apply to our lives. It should not mention the story. Things like universal ideas, we're dealing with surveillance, wealth, things like that. So we're going to focus on characterization. What are your thoughts on Section 2? And how are these conflicts leading to changes in Speth? And how exactly is she changing? And how are her actions changing others and the world around her? And then by Friday, I would like you to reply to 2 other people. They do not have to be just from your class. You can ask them questions. You can respond to their questions. You can add on to their statements. But let's be kind about it, all right? And that leads us to our reminders. Remember, characterization choice assignment due. Conflict and you question on Classroom that'll be posted along with everything else. Think about Wednesday for doing it though. Your Section 2 summaries and the Flipgrid, all due. Now, I'm going to read you guys this story. So, remember, you can get a hold of me on Google Meet. You can text me on Remind. You can email me, any of that. Okay? Cool. Here we go. All right. Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl. The room was warm, the curtains were closed, and 2 table lamps were lit. On the cupboard behind her, there were 2 glasses and some drinks. Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. Now and again, she glanced at the clock, but without anxiety. She merely wanted to satisfy herself that each minute that went by made it nearer the time when he would come home. As she bent over her sewing, she was curiously peaceful. This was her 6th month expecting a child. Her mouth and her eyes, with their new calm look, seemed larger and darker than before. When the clock said 10 minutes to 5, she began to listen, and a few moments later, punctually as always, she heard the car tires on the stones outside, the car door closing, footsteps passing the window, the key turning in the lock. She stood up and went forward to kiss him as he entered. "Hello, darling," she said. "Hello," he answered. She took his coat and hung it up. Then she made the drinks, a strong one for him and a weak one for herself. And soon she was back again in her chair with the sewing, and he was in the other chair holding the tall glass, rolling it gently so the ice knocked musically against the side of the glass. For her, this was always a wonderful time of day. She knew he didn't want to speak much until the first drink was finished, and she was satisfied to sit quietly, enjoying his company after the long hours alone in the house. She loved the warmth that came out of him when they were alone together. She loved the shape of his mouth, and she especially liked the way he didn't complain about being tired. "Tired, darling?" "Yes," he sighed. "I'm thoroughly exhausted." And as he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted his glass and drank it down in one swallow, although there was still half of it left. He got up and went slowly to get himself another drink. "I'll get it," she cried, jumping up. "Sit down," he said. When he came back, she noticed that the new drink was a very strong one. She watched him as he began to drink. "I think it's a shame," she said, "that when someone's been a policeman as long as you have, he still has to walk around all day long." He didn't answer. "Darling," she said, "if you're too tired to eat out tonight, as we had planned, I can fix you something. There's plenty of meat and stuff in the freezer." Her eyes waited to an answer, a smile, a nod, but he made no sign. "Anyway," she went on, "I'll get you some bread and cheese." "I don't want it," he said. She moved uneasily in her chair. "But you have to have supper. I can easily fix you something. I'd like to do it. We can have lamb, anything you want. Everything's in the freezer." "Forget it," he said. "But darling, you have to eat. I'll do it anyway, and then you can have it or not as you like." She stood up and placed her sewing on the table by the lamp. "Sit down," he said. "Just for a minute, sit down." It wasn't until then that she began to get frightened. "Go on," he said. "Sit down." She lowered herself into the chair, watched him all the time with her large, puzzled eyes. He had finished his second drink and was staring into the glass. "Listen," he said. "I've got something to tell you." "What is it, darling? What's the matter?" He became absolutely motionless and he kept his head down. "This is going to be a big shock to you, I'm afraid," he said, "but I've thought about it a good deal, and I've decided that the only thing to do is to tell you immediately." And he told her. It didn't take long, 4 or 5 minutes at most, and she sat still through it all, watching him with puzzled horror. "So there it is," he added, "and I know it's a tough time to be telling you this, but there simply wasn't any other way. Of course, I'll give you money and see that you're taken care of, but there really shouldn't be any problem. I hope not, in any case. It wouldn't be very good for my job." Her first instinct was to not believe any of it. She thought that perhaps she'd imagined the whole thing. Perhaps, if she acted as though she had not heard him, she would find out that none of it had ever happened. "I'll fix some supper," she whispered. When she walked across the room, she couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything except a slight sickness. She did everything without thinking. She went downstairs to the freezer and took hold of the first object she found. She lifted it out and looked at it. It was wrapped in paper. So she took off the paper and looked at it again. A leg of lamb. All right then, they would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs, held the thin end with both her hands. She went to the living room, saw him standing by the window with his back to her, and stopped. "I've already told you," he said. "Don't make supper for me. I'm going out." At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him, and without any pause, she swung the big frozen leg of lamb high in the air and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might as well have hit him with a steel bar. She stepped back, waiting, and the strange thing was, he remained standing there for at least 4 or 5 seconds. Then he crashed into the carpet. The violence of the crash, the noise, the small table overturning helped to bring her out of the shock. She came out slowly, feeling cold and surprised, and she stood for a few minutes, looking at the body, still holding the piece of meat tightly with both hands. "All right," she told herself, "so I've killed him." It was extraordinary now how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew what the punishment would be. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the baby? What were the laws about murderers with unborn children? Did they kill them both, mother and child? Did they wait until the baby was born? What did they do? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, put it into a pan, turned on the oven, and put the pan inside. Then she washed her hands, ran upstairs, sat down in front of the mirror, fixed her makeup, and tried to smile. The smile was rather peculiar. She tried again. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly aloud. The voice sounded peculiar too. "I want some potatoes, Sam. Yes, and perhaps a can of beans." That was better. Both the smile and the voice sounded better now. She practiced them several times more. Then she ran downstairs, took her coat, and went out the back door, through the garden, into the street. It wasn't 6 o'clock yet, and the lights were still on in the neighborhood grocery. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, smiling at the man on the shrub. "Good evening, Miss Maloney. How are you?" "I want some potatoes, please, Sam." "Yes, and perhaps a can of beans, too. Patrick's decided he's tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out on Thursdays, you know, and now I don't have any vegetables in the house." "Then how about some meat, Mrs. Maloney?" asked the grocer. "No, I've got meat, thanks. I've got a nice leg of lamb from the freezer." "Do you want these potatoes, Mrs. Maloney?" "Oh, yes, they'll be fine. 2 pounds, please." "Anything else?" The grocer turned his head to one side, looking at her. "How about dessert? What are you going to give him for dessert? How about a nice piece of cake? I know he likes cake." "Perfect," she said. "He loves it." And when she'd bought and paid for everything, she gave her brightest smile and said, "Thank you, Sam. Good night." And now, she told herself as she hurried back home, she was returning to her husband, and he was waiting for his supper. She had to cook it well and make it taste as good as possible, because the poor man was tired. And if she found anything unusual or terrible when she got home, then it would be a shock, and she would have to react with grief and horror. Of course, she was not expecting to find anything unusual at home. She was just going home with the vegetables on Thursday evening to cook dinner for her husband. That's the way, she told herself. Do everything normally. Keep things absolutely natural, and there will be no need for acting at all. As she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was quietly singing to herself. "Patrick," she called. "How are you, darling?" She put the package on the table and went into the living room. And when she saw him lying there on the floor, it really was a shock. All the old love for him came back to her, and she ran over to him, knelt down beside him, and began to cry hard. It was easy. No acting was necessary. A few minutes later, she got up and went to the phone. She knew the number of the police station, and when the man at the other end answered, she cried to him, "Quick, Quick, come quickly, Patrick's dead. Who's speaking? Mrs. Maloney, Mrs. Patrick Maloney. Do you mean that Patrick's dead? I think so, she cried. He's lying on the floor and I think he's dead. We'll be there immediately, the man said. The car came very quickly, and when she opened the front door, 2 policemen walked in. She knew them both. She knew nearly all the men at the police station. She fell into Jack Noonan's arms, crying uncontrollably. He put her gently into a chair. Is he dead? She cried. I'm afraid he is. What happened? In a few words, she told her story about going to the grocer and coming back. When she found him on the floor, while she was crying and talking, Noonan found some dried blood on the dead man's head. He hurried to the phone. Some other men began to arrive, a doctor, 2 detectives, a police photographer, and a man who knew about fingerprints. The detectives kept asking her a lot of questions. They always treated her kindly. She told them how she'd put the meat in the oven, it's there now, and how she'd gone to the groceries for vegetables, and how she came back to find him lying on the floor. The 2 detectives were exceptionally nice to her. They searched the house. Sometimes Jack Noonan spoke to her gently. He told her that her husband had been killed by a blow to the back of the head. They were looking for the weapon. The murderer might have taken it with him, but he might have thrown it away or hidden it. It's the old story, he said. Get the weapon and you've got the murderer. Later, one of the detectives sat down beside her. Did she know, he asked, of anything in the house that could have been used as a weapon? Would she look around to see if anything was missing? The search went on. It began to get late. It was nearly 9 o'clock. The men searching the rooms were getting tired. Jack, she said, would you like a drink? You must be extremely tired. Well, he answered, it's not allowed by police rules, but since you're a friend. They stood around with drinks in their hands. The detectives were uncomfortable with her, and they tried to say cheering things to her. Jack Noonan walked into the kitchen, came out quickly and said, Look, Miss Maloney, did you know your oven's still on and the meat's still inside? Oh, she said. So it is. I'd better turn it off, she returned with tearful eyes. Would you do me a favor? Here you all are, all good friends of Patrick's, and you're helping to catch the man who killed him? You must be very hungry by now, because it's long past your supper time, and I know that Patrick would never forgive me if I let you stay in the house without offering you anything to eat. Why don't you eat up the lamb in the oven? I wouldn't dream of it, Noonan said. Please, she begged. Personally, I couldn't eat a thing. But it'd be a favor to me if you ate it up. Then you can go on with your work. The detectives hesitated, but they were hungry, and in the end, they went to the kitchen and helped themselves to supper. The woman stayed where she was and listened to them through the open door. She could hear them speaking among themselves, and their voices were thick because their mouths were full of meat. Have some more, Charlie. No, we'd better not finish it. She wants us to finish it. She said we ought to eat it up. That's a big bar the murderer must have used to hit poor Patrick. The doctor says the back of his head was broken to pieces. That's why the weapon should be easy to find. Exactly what I say. Whoever did it, he can't carry a weapon that big around with him. Personally, I think the weapon's somewhere near the house. It's probably right under our noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mary Maloney began to laugh. And that's our story. So as we read this story, you should have noticed that there are a couple of different conflicts going on. Mrs. Maloney did change from beginning to end of the story. And we dealt with universal ideas like revenge, love, heartbreak, deception. We have appearances. So as you complete one of your 3 assignments down here, I would like you to keep all that in mind. Give it a reread if you need to. Go back and try to find things that maybe you missed as I read it to you. But everything is due by Friday at 3 p.m. If you have questions, I'll be on here to answer those for you. All right, guys. I hope you have a fantastic week. Let me know if there's any way I can help you. Peace out.